All right, and we are back with more with the two campaign managers, Corey Lewandowski, the first campaign manager for Donald Trump, Robby Mook, the campaign manager for Hillary Clinton from start to finish. So I want to get started with this extraordinary comment from the president that the press is the enemy of the people. Now, Corey, I just heard that General Mattis, the defense secretary, said the press is not the enemy of the American people. So can you help me understand who's right here, Donald Trump or?
Well, the president's right. The president's always
That's always
right.
the
That's
answer,
how it
right?
works.
Yeah.
Look,
but I mean, but come on, we're not the enemy of the.
Here's what it is. You have to look at it. If you look at the Wall Street Journal this week, front page story about the intelligence briefings not being given to the president, clearly inaccurate. Clearly. Now, you had the director of Central Intelligence and the president going on
reporter gets a story
record.
wrong is not the same as saying enemy of the people.
You put a story out there that says the intelligence community is not giving the president all of the information. That's very dangerous. You look at the New York Times story this week. You know, you see time and time again where you have anonymous sources. And look, I understand the value of anonymous sources. But when you have people on the record that are the principals, whether it's the President of the United States or it's the Director of Central Intelligence, saying this information is factually inaccurate and the press chooses to report it anyways, that's very dangerous to the American people.
I completely disagree. There were so many wrong, inaccurate stories about Hillary Clinton on the campaign all the time. In fact,
you guys didn't like that New York Times story about the emails, as I recall, right?
That was false. The New York Times wrote a piece in October last year saying that there was no connection between the Trump campaign and Russia, or that there was very little there. They then wrote the story that was completely different recently. I'm glad they did. You know, freedom of the press is fundamental to who we are as a country. And it's fundamental to our freedoms. And what's scary to me right now is that President Trump is saying this about the press at the same time that he's praising leaders like Vladimir Putin, who regularly and routinely harass, jail the press. We cannot let this come into our country, that kind of autocratic, dictatorial leadership.
Jonathan, you can have freedom of the press, but it has to be honest, right? And the president said this. You can write any story
But the press is free to make mistakes, too.
But look, where's the accountability? Here's the problem with the press when they make a mistake.
The accountability is with viewers and readers.
Yeah, but you know what they say? Oh, mea culpa. And look, the Time magazine guy who tweeted out that the bust of Martin Luther King Jr. was removed from the Oval Office made it to 3,000 media outlets before they responded and said, whoops, I guess I made a mistake. What we know is that on many occasions, the White House was never consulted. We saw it just this week. Hey, we're going to engage and use the National Guard to round up people. Absolutely, factually, 100% inaccurate. They never checked with the White House.
What's interesting about that is actually the AP said that they did check with the White House and there was no response until after the story ran.
But look, there has to be accountability. And where is the accountability at the reporter level when they report something like the bust of Martin Luther King Jr. has been removed? Now, look, is that a big story? No, but it is symptomatic of the problem where a phone call to the White House could have fixed that before the story went out and 3,000 outlets carried it.
Jonathan, this is particularly rich coming from the team that comes from Breitbart News. I mean, talk about falsehoods, lies, total inaccuracies. I don't think that Donald Trump or his White House has any credibility when it comes to telling the truth and getting the facts right. I'm sorry. And they can beat up on the press, and it's a great diversion because guess what? The press likes to write about it. And so they'll write about that instead of what Donald Trump is doing, putting Wall Street in charge and so on, spending taxpayer money at his resorts. But this administration has no credibility on saying that the media should get the story right.
What's interesting to me is I spent a lot of time covering the Clinton campaign and a lot of time, of course, covering the Trump campaign. And for much of the campaign, Hillary Clinton was almost completely inaccessible to the press. She didn't hold press conferences. You could get up to her, you could ask a question, she would ignore you, look right through you. Donald Trump was on the phone all the time. He was holding press conferences. He was doing interviews.
Not later in the campaign, though.
No, it's
not in the last few months.
It certainly changed later in the campaign. Absolutely.
When Corey was there, he was good.
When Corey was there,
Corey gets credit for that. Absolutely.
Yeah, so let's get to that because you were there when he was Mr. Accessible. Does this team currently around him make a mistake when they try to rein him in and say he's only going to take a few questions from friendly outlets? He's going to limit the number of interviews. I mean, he seemed in his element in that press conference. That was a throwback to the Corey Lewandowski days of the campaign.
Look, my belief, and I've been very open about this, is that Donald Trump is his best messenger. He understands the media, in my opinion, better than any staff person who works for his campaign. He understands how to answer questions on behalf of him and his administration better. I always believe it's an asset when he can go out and speak directly for himself. Now, you have to understand, He's the president of the United States,
Right.
and there's a limited opportunity to do that. But when he's given those opportunities, I think he excels in it. We saw last night on the airplane.
Because he went 6 months without giving a press conference.
He went to the back of the plane last night, and I think he's been doing this very regularly in Air Force One, walking back and having brief conversations to the press area to have those discussions. Look, that's the president at his very best, is direct communication, whether it's through his social media accounts, which he loves to use to directly communicate with the people, or talking to the press directly. You know this, Jonathan. When the press calls, he will pick up the phone and he'll respond to those calls very, very regularly. That hasn't been the case in the past with other candidates.
That was certainly the case when you were there. How do you think Sean Spicer's doing?
Look, I think Sean's got a real tough job, and Sean's a friend of mine, but I think he's growing into the role as White House press secretary. I'm glad to see that they have given Sean some help now with a new communications director, and I think what you'll see is Sean understands. He's getting to know the president very well, understands the way he speaks, the way he works, his cadences, and Sean's going to do a fine job, but it's a tough job. It's a very tough job.
I think you can agree with that.
I completely agree. I think it's an impossible job. I actually feel for some of these staff in as much as it is basically impossible, I think, to represent Donald Trump and maintain one's own credibility, frankly. And I say that in a very objective way.
I mean, he is his own communications director, first of all, right? I mean, he is calling the shots there.
But again, what I worry about long term is how President Trump's lack of credibility is eroding, I would argue, the weight of that bully pulpit that the president has.
You mean the disregard for facts?
The total disregard for facts.
How do you explain that? Because you know there are some things that are said that are...
Look at the Fox News poll out this week. Who do you trust to tell you the truth? Donald Trump, President of the United States, or the mainstream media? Donald Trump is 3 points above the mainstream media. What does that tell you about what the people think of the mainstream media these days? Go look at Media Research Center when they said they did a poll immediately following the election. Do you believe the bias in the media? 97% of the respondents said we didn't allow the media's bias to change our opinion of who we voted for.
But do you cringe a little bit when he says stuff that just turns out to be completely not true? I mean, like when he said he had the biggest electoral landslide since Reagan. I mean, you know that's not true.
So as it comes to the Republicans, okay, so George H.W. Bush had a larger margin. Okay, I understand that. But what he was talking about is he beat George W. Bush. He clearly beat Mitt Romney. Clearly beat John McCain.
Beat all
those
guys.
Right?
And he had a higher margin than W's.
And don't forget, I went back and looked at the reporting on October 16th of just last year.
Right.
Article after article after article said that Hillary Clinton was going to win by anywhere between 70 and 100 electoral votes over Donald Trump, and they moved the state of Florida right after the third debate to lean Democrat. I looked at the New York Times.
No question, a lot of people were very
Everybody
wrong.
was wrong.
Final word, Robby.
Ironically, you know, when I was growing up, President Reagan was out there. He did a lot of things wrong, a lot of things I disagree with. But what he talked about more than anything was what made this country great and what made us strong. And he lifted people up. And my concern is Donald Trump is tearing the institution of the presidency down. He's trying to bring the press down with him. And I worry about young people growing up today who see this race to the bottom and think that that's leadership. It's not leadership. He's not bringing people together, and I don't think he's making our country greater.
Well, we will bring you guys back to talk about this more, but let's just say for the record, we got Robby Mook to say some very nice things about Ronald Reagan.
That's very good, yes.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us, guys. Really appreciate it.